Okay, so we're live. Hello and welcome to the Michael Mamas Show. I'm your host, Michael Mamas, and we're coming to you from Mount Soma, home of the Sri Someshwara Temple in the mountains of western North Carolina. Here with Scott Davalos today, and we are going to talk about what is it? Do you see that message there from StreamYard? Are we okay there?
Yeah.
Right? Okay, good. All right, Scotty is our technical director. Yeah. All right, so I wanted to talk today, about Ukraine and everything that's going on in Ukraine, and I think also a lot of the knowledge that the ancient masters gave us, uh, I think, becomes particularly relevant. um, but gee, I mean, I don't know. I imagine most of you have been watching the news a little bit at least, and watching it. It's heartbreaking to see all the families, and I guess there's like over 1.4 by the end of the day today. They're anticipating 1.5 million people will be displaced. Most of them women and children. The husbands are staying there in Ukraine to fight the Russians, and just walked away from their homes. They don't know where they're going. Most of them are in Poland now, and they're, some are going to go to Germany, some are going to go here, some are Romania or here or there. And then the bombs blowing up and this people getting killed and children. It's just really difficult to watch. And then I think the question just naturally comes up. That whole thing. I guess it's an age-old question: if there's a God, then why do children suffer? And how can all be God's will? That kind of a thing. So I thought I'd talk about that a little bit today. Basically, when this universe, this propensium got created, there are certain laws of physics, really, laws of nature. You could say are God's will. Other people might say, well, it's just the nature of existence. It's physics. And we could get into discussions about that. It speaks to the idea that there are multiple simultaneously valid but contradictory perspectives. You could look at it that way. But instead of getting off into that, I'd like to stick with this idea of, why? What's the mechanics of that whole thing? And here's the thing. God's will, it can really be perplexing and confusing. And I think a lot of people, really think about it through the ages. It seems people have had trouble with that one. But if we just take a look at the structure of existence, and actually, I think modern physics can even help people with that, with Heisenberg uncertainty principle and all that. But basically, to say it in, I think more familiar terms, we could say God's will comes in two different forms. There's karma and there's free will. And karma is just, cause and effect. For every action, there's an equal but opposite reaction. And you can look at the analogy I use is if you have a billiard table and you roll a billiard ball on it, if you knew the coefficient of friction of the felt and the elasticity of the cushions and the speed and mass and spin and all that of the ball, you can calculate exactly where that billiard ball is going to stop after you roll it. And that's just physics. That's just karma. That's just the laws of physics. And this universe, from that side of God's will, if you will, from the laws of nature, it's just like a big cosmic computer. It's all math. It's all predetermined. You see, you're going to know where all the electrons and protons and neutrons end up, 5 minutes from now or 1,000 years from now, if that was all there was to it. And if you had a big enough computer, which we don't, but if you did, it's all predetermined. And that's one half of God's will. The other half is free will. The way Heisenberg put it, if I can talk to that a little bit, is an electron isn't a point in space. It's a probability cloud. And how you interact with that probability cloud determines where the electron, precipitates out as a point in space. It could be here, it could be here, it could even be way over there. So there's a certain amount of freedom there. But now it gets a little more interesting than that, because it's the human mind. The ancient seers said that the human mind, is the result of two things. Prana is like life force, breath, Shakti, if you want. It's just prana, breath, life. And it's the interaction of that life force with karma. So prana plus karma creates mind. And so much then of what do we think, what we feel, what we experience, our perception of things, our perspectives on things, it's karma. It's mostly karma. So the whole thing with Ukraine going on around, we could say it's just karma. People act certain ways through history, and karma builds up and it precipitates out. It results in what's going on in Ukraine, what's going on all over the world right now. And that's the whole idea of predetermination. You see, it's all predetermined. But there's the other side of the coin, which is just free will. And we have free will. But what is free will? Let's take a look at free will a little bit, because number one, just because we feel like we're free doesn't mean we're free. Just because we think our thoughts are our own doesn't necessarily mean they are. That could be the karmic functioning of our minds. In fact, that's why in the Zen Buddhists would call it, you want to achieve the state of no mind. Now, what the heck does that mean? People try to walk around, I don't have a mind, no mind, no mind. That's not it. That's karma, you see. But the state of a no mind means that the awareness is free from karma. And then if it's free from karma, if it's not predetermined by karmic fluctuations of brain waves and et cetera, then where does it come from? Well, it comes from the transcendental depth of your being, that place where you are one with what? The transcendent, one with that underlying basis of existence, one with what? You could say God. And so there's God's will, and there's our individual will, which is basically karmic. But when our individuality awakens to its own true nature, you realize, and it's not a concept, it's a state of physiology. You see that you're one with everything, you're unified with everything, you're functioning from that place. But, if you say, well, okay, great, I'm one with everything, and that's my philosophy, and I'm going to live my life like that, and so I'm free from karma. No. That is karma. We're talking about a state of physiology, not an attitude or a belief system or a perspective, you see. So the other thing about God's will, though, from the perspective of free will, it's not like if you get a room full of people that are all equally awake to their own true nature, all functioning from that free will, that they're all going to think the same thing. It's a little bit more like if the transcendent was like an ocean of being, an ocean of oneness, you see. There's still fluctuations, there are waves, and they can even crash up against each other. So there can be differences of opinions on things, even among people that are, fully self with a capital S, self-realized, you see. And so that's what it is. And so now when we get into questions like with Ukraine and that, it can be like, well, if my thoughts are mostly karma and my feelings are mostly karma, then how do I know what direction to go with my life, what I should do? Well, I actually have a little book I wrote called Look Deeper, Live Better. The more you function from the depth of your being, and that doesn't mean the deepest place you're capable of feeling into in the moment, It means the deepest place that's humanly possible to feel into, that transcendental place. Uh, uh, and functioning from that place, living life from that place. It's a very exalted state. You know, they call it enlightenment or whatever. And uh, the problem is, the challenge is that even if you're functioning from karma and all your thoughts and everything are karmic, you feel like you're free, you know? And, you know, people make different attempts at it, but all those you could say are karmic too. Like, oh, okay, I'm going to be a man who hears a different drum, and like Thoreau said that, I guess. Or you can be like, well, I'm not going to just go with the mainstream. Well, that's karmic too. You know, just because you say you're not doesn't mean you're not. That's just another karmic wave you're riding, you see? So it all kind of works like that. And then you have these different groups, like you have the Russians and you have the Ukrainians. If you're watching the news, at least the parts of the news that I watch, it's like the Ukrainians are, you know, and I believe this. They're wonderful people. They're good people. And all of a sudden they're getting invaded. And so they certainly, you know, a lot of them for good reason, you know, they use the word hate the Russians, you know. But now from the Russian perspective, they're, Ukraine has been and always has been a part of Russia, and this just, or USSR, you know, and it just recently split, and they want to reunify their country, you know, and so they have their justification. Personally, I can't see how, you know, the violence and the horrible things, the bombings and all that, cluster bombs, vacuum bombs, all that horrible stuff, how they can justify it. But the point is, they would think that the opposing team's attitude is karmic. The opposing team would think their attitude is karmic. And how do you know? Well, the more you can be still and rest into deeper and deeper places of your being, the more you're going to be functioning in harmony with nature, with natural law. And that's mostly a physiological state, but it's something that can be created. But also, in the meantime, we can develop a level of humility around our biases, around our perspectives, around our preconceived notions, to understand. It's not overstand, it's understand, you know? And so then we can start to understand these situations a little bit better. Now, that doesn't mean that, you know, I just can't wrap my head around that, you know, justifying doing the horrible things to children and things with the bombs and all. So there's, you know, a line that you draw where it's just so blatantly obvious. And that's not really the arena we're talking about here. We're talking about the more subtle arenas. But nevertheless, if you're so adamantly attached to a perspective and a point of view and an identity with a perspective, you become so passionate about it. You know, the depth of your being and the intensity of your feelings don't necessarily correspond. You know, you can have very profoundly intense emotions and feelings and convictions about something. Doesn't mean you're coming from the depth of your being. You know, that can all be karmic, you know. So this whole thing about God's will and having faith in God, you know, I think we're coming into a time now. This phase transition is horrible. It's going to be really bad the rest of this year, as I said in my predictions for 2022. And it's going to be a couple more years after that it's going to continue to sort out. But we're headed to a much better age. And it's going to be, spiritually speaking, religiously speaking, if you will, we're going to move away from the age of faith. And we're going to enter into an age of understanding. Because to me, faith, it's like, well, I don't know, so I just have faith. And then in one sense, it's a beautiful thing, because what is that saying? That means that you can feel in the depth of your being, there's something there. Divinity is there. God exists, that kind of thing. And you don't really understand it, but you just feel it. And that's beautiful. But imagine an age where the feeling is more fully integrated on all different levels of your being. So you have a profound understanding. So you don't just say, oh, okay, it's the will of God. You have this understanding, of karma versus free will, and how the two interact, and how it's just, nature. And we're coming into that age. We're coming into the dawn of an age of knowledge. And it's one thing that's really interesting here is that when you look at the global situation, not just Ukraine, but everywhere, Canada, there was that grassroots uprising with the truckers. So you had the truckers and then the autocrat, the oligarchs, that small group that dominates the grassroots, everybody else, And now what's happening in the United States is a similar thing. There's an uprising of grassroots. We got truckers now headed towards DC, if they haven't gotten there yet. And there's a whole upheaval there. And if you look at Ukraine, incredible that the people in Ukraine are all, they're bearing arms. They're fighting the invaders, which just tangentially, that's one of the reasons they had the right to bear arms in the Constitution, is so that if there was a need for a militia ever, the people could defend the country that way, So anyway, there's that grassroots uprising, and then you've got Russia, and again, I hate to call him a tyrannical dictator, even though there's a certain component of him that is tyrannical and a dictator. Putin, trying to overcome the grassroots. So you got, again, the autocrat versus the people, we the people. And then if you look at Russia, and again, this is on the news, and who knows what news is true and what's not. But if you watch the news, seems to be what's going on is that there are a lot of people in Russia that are really upset with Putin, really upset with the war, really opposed to what they're doing to Ukraine. And so once again, there we have the grassroots versus the autocrat. And then if you look at China, even China, the Chinese people love America. It's just that small group of autocrats at the top, the Communist Party, that is controlling everything and creating polarity with the United States and other nations. But you see, all over the world now, it's like there's a movement of the grassroots to step up, and with this, dawn of a golden age around the corner, it's going to be really interesting to see how all that shakes out and where it ends up. On the one hand, wouldn't it be wonderful if we could have an enlightened leader? I mean, the wisdom of Solomon, a leader that's really and truly fit to lead. And it's actually been said that democracy is what comes up when there's no one around who's fit to lead. So it's like, well, nobody really knows, so I got an idea, let's vote on it, So in a way, that sounds ludicrous, because it's like the blind leading the blind. That argument can be made, So with an enlightened age coming, it's going to be really interesting to see where it comes about. Is this all clear, Scotty? Am I doing okay with all this?
You're doing great.
Yeah. Go ahead.
It was, making me think of when you kind of explained how, like, consciousness becomes aware of itself, the other, and then that whole karmic thing that comes out of that, right? So,
Yeah.
So that's the beginning. And then all that stuff comes together to make all the particles of the universe. And then all that stuff came together to make the particles of Earth. And then those interactions made all of us. And then all these karmic actions or of us as individuals, we're kind of like a sum total of all of our experiences.
Yeah.
Right?
It's an interesting thing, because there's that self-interacting dynamic of pure consciousness. The only thing that is consciousness. Consciousness perceives it as other, duality is born.
Right.
Conscious becomes aware of those two things, and you get this of those two things, a third thing is born, then a fourth and a fifth, and it cascades out to infinity. Now, the Veda, which is all within the transcendent, it's called Apurusheya. Purusha means, people, man, really, but it's really of the relative. So Apurusheya means not of the relative. And so that means the absolute. And so you have that whole structure, which is called the Veda, contained within, you could say, within the absolute, you see? And it only becomes Purusheya when it manifests into relativity. And that's when the projection, identity, all that stuff creeps in, you see? But nevertheless, see what connects Apurusheya with Purusheya, that's the gap. And that's called Smriti, which is memory. This is Shruti, the pure knowledge within the absolute. Then Smriti goes to memory, and then you have the field of relativity, and all the aspects of this knowledge from the ancients that is about that is called Vedic literature. And it's in Vedic literature where you have, the Vedangas, the Upangas, the Itihasas, the Ramayana, the Mahabharata, the Puranas, all of that stuff. Within the Apurusheya, within the absolute, it's the 10 mandalas. You got the mantras, the brahmanas, like that. And so, Scotty, that's kind of what you're talking about is once it goes into relativity, then you get this whole karmic thing going.
Yeah.
Well,
also you get all these cultures that are branching off of that. So you have the Russian culture, you have the Chinese culture, you have the American culture that came out of all of these cultures coming together and bouncing off of each other.
Boy, you're so right. And then cultures, the thing about cultures, see, everything is a mandala. And that echoes out through memory, through Smriti, from the 10 mandalas of Rig Veda, which is all within Shruti, all within the absolute. But see, everything in relative is also a mandala, but it's of karma, and it's of relativity. And so that way, every culture, Scotty, like you're talking about, every culture is a mandala. It's a circle. And you start at one point on the circle and it has a certain value. You go to the next point, no different, no different, no different, no different. When you get to the opposite end of the circle, even though it seemed no different all the way, you've got something that's completely the opposite. And then it comes back in. So it's a mandala. And so there's a high end and a low end of the mandala. And you think of a culture, and I mean, a lot of these things, it's politically incorrect to say them out loud even. But every mandala has a low end, and it's a generalization. You can talk about any culture, Americans, Russians, Ukrainians, I don't care, you name it. Yeah. There's a low end, but there's also the high end, the greatness of that culture. When we think of the laudable nature of, we could say a truly wonderful and exquisite, ideal family, if you will, that comes out of that culture. They have certain attributes, and they're unique to that culture, you see. But what happens when there's polarization? And you see, cultural integrity is one thing. Racism is another. I say that racism is cultural integrity gone insane, and there are degrees between pure cultural integrity and then extreme racism. So in there, when one culture is identified with their culture, and that's a beautiful thing, but they look at another culture, there is a tendency, doesn't always happen, but it's common, that what you look at is the low end of that mandala of the other culture, and you generalize about that culture, that whole culture is that way. And you might know better, but still that's how you feel, and that's how you function. Oftentimes that's how you talk, you see?
Right.
And yeah, so it's a really great point you bring up, Scotty, the whole thing about the nature of cultures, and that kind of goes deeper into the ancient secrets, the ancient knowledge of mandala and how it applies to that. And the whole thing with cultural integrity is such a mess today. You know, it's like you can't say, it's very risky to say a generalization about the unique nature of a particular culture because so you're racist. Well, no, and it's also, I found it was an interesting thing that in some of the classrooms in California, which was very progressive classrooms now, they were talking about having separate classrooms for the black kids so that they could all bond. And that's racist and stuff like that. Well, there's a natural tendency, birds of a feather, what have you. And, if a bunch of Italians get together, like in The Godfather at the wedding scene in the beginning, there was a beauty there. And yeah, you can make generalizations about it. And yeah, they enjoyed that bonding of people, birds of a feather. It's not a bad thing in and of itself, So that's it. When you say it, it's just so it's self-evident, isn't it? Well, of course that's true. But we don't tend to function that way in the politically correct climate of the country today. We have a tendency to want to homogenize all the cultures into one mentality. And it's not, it doesn't work that way. It's not supposed to work that way. It never will work that way. And that's a good thing. All the flowers in a garden aren't identical, What else, Scotty? Let me see.
We got a comment something about faith, and the comment goes, faith is pretending you know something you don't know or have no way of knowing.
Yeah, that's a beautiful statement, isn't it? Because that's the whole idea of faith is you don't really know, but you feel. And one could argue that, look, my faith is so strong. I feel it so deeply. Maybe I can't prove it intellectually, but I just know it. I just know it. And look how deep that kind of knowing goes, even though they built huge temples before. And people labored for years building these huge temples, thousands of people. And there wasn't really a clear intellectual understanding at the time of, free will, predetermination, Heisenberg probability cloud, all that. But they could just feel it inside the depth of their being. There's divinity there. And actually, what gets interesting then is that people with an intellectual paradigm identity get so attached to that paradigm identity. And if the identity is like science, well, you can't prove it scientifically that there's a God. So, it's hocus pocus, blah, blah. And what happens is, and see, there's a value to the science. It's discerning, it's discriminating, it's pursuing knowledge in a more pure sense. If you understand the word pure there, that can be interpreted different ways in a more rigorous sense. But if you get too caught up in that, then you lose your own inner sense of that divinity. And no, I sense that. I just don't call it divinity. I call it a sense of universality or what have you. Well, now we're playing with words, But the thing is, too, the words you use can actually sterilize the finer values. It can sterilize your feelings of the finer qualities of what that thing is that you're sensing, you see? So if there was a personified correlate there, you go into denial of it. And we talked about this the past couple of podcasts, didn't we? Where we talked about guardian angels and angels. And I don't know, if you go to Niagara Falls, it's like, you can look, it's beautiful, it's incredible, and it has a beautiful feeling. But it's not mood making. It can be. We also turn into mood making, but at the same time, as the physiology refines, as we come from that deeper transcendental place, as opposed to some superficial emotional state, if we can say it that way. What happens then is you don't capture the meaning fully, the feeling fully, unless you realize that there's got a personified correlate to it. Like they asked Albert Einstein, can you describe a sunset in terms of pure physics? And he said, yes, you can, but if you do, it loses its meaning. You see? And even though the advances we've made with physics, I mean, I was a physics and math major in undergrad. I believe in it. I love it. But the advances we've made, as great as they are, and they are truly great, if we're not careful, they sterilize a lot of the nature of life, I don't know if this is true or not, but I do know it's true that people are saying, and if you go online, you can search it. Two things, and then we'll wind up. But these are both really important things. I can remember them both. Some are saying that one of the reasons Russia is invading Ukraine, and one of the reasons, same reason China wants to invade Taiwan, is because they have bioweapons research labs in those countries, and they're intimidated by it. Some people are adamant about it. They're people I really respect. I think they're intelligent, and they're usually right, solid, and they're saying that. So I don't know, but it's something to explore and see. That even creates a very, I mean, how do you react to that when you hear it? Oh, no, that's not true. Well, that's, how open are we, Or, oh, yes, well, I'm sure that's got to be right. If that, that wouldn't be good either. So now we're navigating those waters of what ultimately amounts to not knowing. And what's your relationship with not knowing? That's a tough one for people, we want to know. And we like to boil our spirituality down to a bunch of knowings. Well, if I follow these 10 commandments, then I'm going to go to heaven. Or, give me a cookbook explanation of how spirituality works. I don't want to cite examples because I don't want to be offensive to those groups. But if you think about it, a lot of spirituality or religion boils down to cookbook, and it's not cookbook, you see. And so then, so there's that thing. And then the other thing is, this is interesting. George Soros, I guess most of you know who George Soros is. He's a wealthy businessman. He's Jewish, and during World War II, he's old. During World War II, I understand, it's well known, I think, that he didn't disclose the fact that he was Jewish, and then he helped the Nazis find Jews to take to the camps, So anyway, George Soros now is behind the scenes. He's got an organization called New World Order, I think it is, something like that. And he's wanting to create this New World Order. And he's funded Antifa, Black Lives Matter. He's very militant. And what's being said is that he's trying to undermine this nation. And he's done that with other nations. In fact, when he undermines nations, what he tends to do is buy puts, speculate in the investment arena that the value of the currency is going to go down. Then he helps to collapse the nation, and then he makes a bunch of money because the currency is not worth anything anymore. And so now here's the interesting thing, is that he's financing Antifa and Black Lives Matter against the democracy, against America. But now he's teamed up with, what's the name of the president of Ukraine? I don't know. But anyway, he teamed up with that guy to create polarization with Russia, to create unrest there. So he wants to try to bring everything down, bring all the different nations down and everything, so that they can rebuild this vision he has of a new world order. This is something I shouldn't probably even say out loud, but I said that to a group, to some people, and one of them said, I don't even want to say it, but they said that Adolf Hitler, I guess in Mein Kampf, said that there are people that are doing that, and they want to destroy all the organizations, all the countries, all the nations in the world, and then build their own world on top of that heap of ashes. Anyway, I think Scotty, remember before we did this podcast, I said we're going to get into something delicate here maybe, and this is it. I don't want to be misunderstood here, but I think it is good to consider the possibility of trying to bring down nations, and then also the idea that these bioweapons labs. I know there are bioweapons labs all over. There's at least one in North Carolina. I think there's one in Texas. I mean, they're all over the place. And the thing about researching viruses and making them more dangerous. One last thing here is that there's the whole idea of microbiomes. Microbiomes means that there's like a family of bacterias and viruses and funguses and all that, molds and everything. And when they're functioning in concert as a unified whole, then that wholeness actually brings health. And it brings health to the body. There's a toothpaste called Revitin, Revitin, that builds the microbiomes in the mouth. And not everybody, it depends on the pH and the enzymes present, things like that, and bacterial content naturally in the mouth. But for some people, it's just no more tartar, no more stains on the teeth. It works miraculously. Other people, different pH, different enzymes, different bacterial content, doesn't do that much for. But nevertheless, the point is there's a microbiomes, and some of these viruses and bacteria, a lot of people think, oh, that's terrible. It's a virus. It's a bacteria. Do you know there are viruses that actually support life? And that's where our research should be. Let's check out these microbiomes. Let's check out how we make, we don't sterilize our physiologies. We don't sterilize the planet, but we work to make them function in concert with a healthy microbiome, you see, all those things. I guess they talk about that with, probiotics, right, Scotty?
Yeah.
Yeah, but the whole idea of microbiomes is probiotics and much more, All right, anything else, Scotty? Go ahead.
There was a couple of comments.
Good.
And maybe we should speak about, it said, I think it was just after the faith one where you said, now you're conflating confidence or feelings with knowledge, not the same thing. And then I care if.
No, wait a minute. I don't understand it. They're saying that I did that?
Yeah, I guess that, yeah. Now we're.
All right. Okay. It's a good question. There's knowledge. The word can be used different ways. There can be knowledge meaning intellectual understanding. I have knowledge, and that's great. But all I was saying there is there can be another kind of knowledge, a knowledge based on not just memorizing facts or being able to do what you could plug into a computer, but knowledge based on an inner knowing and inner feeling. It's a different kind of knowledge. And so I'm not really refuting what that comment's saying, but I'm just clarifying that there's an inner knowing. In fact, this is how interesting that gets. How did I used to say it? Facts matter little. How you feel, or it's how you. What did I say? Thoughts matter little. It's how you feel about those thoughts that make all the difference. You can have a thought, but it just doesn't feel right. And then you have another thought and it feels right. And oftentimes what we construct as our body of, knowledge as far as intellectual understanding goes, oftentimes that's based a lot more on how we feel about those thoughts and those notions than we might realize. In fact, if this is going way out overboard with it, but just to illustrate the point in the extreme, 2 + 2 = 4. How do you know 2 + 2 = 4? Well, you can take two and put them together. You got four things. But nevertheless, as a concept, 2 + 4 = 4. Yeah, I buy that because it feels right. Not saying, well, no. You take two apples, you put them with two apples, you got four apples, period. Well, the whole mathematical basis of modern physics is called abstract algebra. And the whole mathematical structure of abstract algebra, 2 + 2 doesn't necessarily equal 4. In fact, just to give us a very simple example of the mathematical basis of our existence, how much is 11 plus 3? What's 11 plus 3? 14? No. 11 plus 3 turns out to be 2. And the simple example is the face of a watch. You got 11 o'clock, you add 3, 11, 12 o'clock, 1, 2. So 11 plus 3. And that might be, well, you're messing with my mind here. You're just goofing, and that's just an intellectual goof. Well, it's also the way the universe works. Abstract algebra is the mathematical basis of modern physics, and it's the mathematical basis of the nature of existence. So I hope I didn't get off too much of a tangent there, because the fundamental point of that question makes perfect sense, and I'm glad they gave me the opportunity to clarify what I was saying.
Sure. And then he had another question, which is there any position that cannot be taken on the basis of faith?
That's a good one. No, it just depends on how rational a person is. If you're totally psychotic, you can have faith in anything. But see, that's the thing. We're talking about integration, and these are good questions. Brings up another important point, because what it does is it speaks to the integration of different levels of life. Faith based on deep feeling, as opposed to faith based upon programming and indoctrination, but deep faith, as it wells up through different levels of our being. We start with feeling, and then if our physiology is integrated, what we feel, we discern, and it can be reasonable. Now we're reasoning, and then as that wells up more, and then we explore it more, it becomes more concrete in thought, and it becomes what we commonly call knowledge. We have knowledge. But you see, then knowledge is based upon reason, is based upon feeling. You see, so it's an outstanding question, and I hope that helps with it.
Yeah.
What else? Did that do it? Is that clear, Scott?
Yeah. And maybe just I think you kind of addressed this, but the difference between belief and knowledge. You can believe something based on an indoctrination,
Yeah.
right? But it doesn't necessarily make it so, right?
Right.
Is that kind of
conditioning, programming, identity with a perspective. Just because you grow up in a certain part of the world doesn't necessarily mean you should subscribe to whatever the religion is in that locale. But see, even that, now we get into,
right.
It gets more subtle than that. That's a whole thing,
Sure.
whole other discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, what you believe. That'd be a whole exploration of why do you believe what you believe.
Right.
Yeah.
How did you arrive at that belief?
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And how open are you to a deeper level of understanding? One thing that I've talked about this, I think, in the past, but Baptist ministers, I talked to some, I'm living in Western North Carolina, and I've had deep conversations with probably about a half a dozen anyway, Baptist ministers. And I was really impressed with every single one of the ones, at least that I spoke with, that they're deep thinkers. And when we go into these discussions about things, it's not like, well, no, it says in the Bible, blah, 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 and you don't know. They love it. And they very quickly can see how it brings about perhaps a deeper understanding of certain verses in the Bible or whatever than perhaps they may have been aware of. It's just like what we talked about today: free will versus predetermination. That kind of a thing. And so, see, the point there being that you can be in a religion, Baptist or whatever, and every religion, if you follow it to its depth, it leads to the same place. It's just a question of, how deeply one is capable and also how deeply one is willing to look. Does that make sense, Scotty?
Sure.
Yeah.
And is it, and then, so, if you're going to put some of these words about the process that you should really be going through to determine things, you need to really use everything that you have, your intellect, your feeling, those thoughts are tools for you to use.
Yeah.
And the bottom line is that, going back to the only true knowing is we know nothing at all, but you got to take your best shot based on, maybe you can put that in better.
Yeah, what did I say? When I used to like to say, what was it? Something is a great tools, but lousy masters.
Right, thoughts. Yeah.
They're great tools, but lousy masters. There was more on that.
Because this all goes back to, are you, you have, as an individual, a lot of times you don't have any idea what's driving those subconscious thoughts that are just coming out, that karmic aspect of it that seems to be pushing you in a direction.
Well, even our identity with the scientific approach.
Right.
How much of that is just identity with the approach? That scientific approach it's one small facet of Vedic knowledge, and it's there and it's honored and obviously of great value. Everything in this room I'm sitting in is built based on it. But there's so much more. It's so much more to life and existence and the nature of it. So many more paradigms that we could embrace, and that's where we get into this idea of transgradient flexibility. Is one capable of aligning with the paradigm that best serves the moment, or that's more applicable to the moment, as opposed to hanging on to one rigid perspective, and this is going to answer all my questions, and if it doesn't answer a particular question, then it's a bad question and we can just reject it.
Yeah. I put it into this formula that I've always been using, whatever, and it let me down.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Or then some of you have a belief system and then it stops working. So what do? Instead of going beyond belief systems in general, they just try to find another belief system. And the self-help section of the New Age bookstores are loaded with things like that.
Yeah.
Try this belief system,
Right.
Yeah. And so people say, well, isn't what you're teaching, Michael, isn't that a belief system? And I say that the value of my belief system is that it self-destructs.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember once a student put up her hand, this was years ago, and said, you teach us one thing one day, then you teach us something else the next day, and they contradict. Which is it? No, she said, and I said, right. I said, that's right. That's the point. Infinite number of simultaneously valid but contradictory perspectives. The classic example I would use is chakras. You look at one chakra book and it's the heart chakra is a particular color, shaped a particular way. You look at another chakra book, it's different. Now, is one guy right and the other guy wrong? No, simultaneously valid. What's a good example? Well, you can feel your heart. Nobody says, oh, my elbow is swelling in love. My heart is swelling in love. That's a chakra. Get rid of the hocus pocus. Get rid of the la la land. Call it a psychophysiological center. And we've got more than one, Sick to my stomach. There's another one. Give me a headache. I'm thinking too hard. That's another one, Pain in the neck. That's another one. And so there are psychophysiological centers. And in our classes, I go into depth about those and what they are and how they work. And they're real, At the same time, there was a Chinese doctor, and a world famous, great Chinese doctor. This guy was fabulous, became a dear friend of mine. He was in Manhattan, and old man, passed away now. And I asked him about chakras once, and he said, "There's no such thing. No such thing." And I thought that was really interesting because this guy's a great perceiver of energy, and uh, uh, so there's a lot more to the way the universe is wired and the way it's made up. And as we come to understand it more, then these things start to make sense. But if we hang on to one paradigm, we don't get very far. You know, uh, uh, the modern approach to knowledge, it's a great approach, and it's a hugely valuable approach, and it's a place we can hang our hat, but it's not the only valid approach. All right, I guess that's about it. Anything else, Scotty?
No, that's good. I think it's good for.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk with you again next week about whatever's up then. Bye bye.